Hi, my name is Deidre Gilly, and I'm saying hello to everybody watching my Product of Learning screencast. It was during the spring of 2017 where I was placed at Mount Pleasant High School in an inclusion setting. I'm going to start off this screencast by going over the table of contents. We're going to look at an overview, caseload students, the IEPs I wrote, lesson plans, documentation over time throughout the past couple months, my focus student, the technology portfolio, and a standards breakdown. The overview, as I mentioned just a moment ago, I was at Mount Pleasant High School. My co-operating teacher was Miss Newmeyer. Miss Newmeyer has had 20 years of experience within the public school system, ranging from inclusion settings to self-contained. Throughout this semester, I've worked within an inclusion setting with first, second, and fourth block, Math 1, Math 2, and English 1. Over the course of these 2 months as well, I have had 17 caseload students to manage. The caseload students, as I mentioned, were 17 in total. They ranged between the following disabilities: selective mutism, autism, specific learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, English language learner, and a combination of more than one. Throughout my live binder, hard copy binder, and presentation, I will refer to my students as classified numbers that link them to their real name known only to me. This is to keep confidentiality with my students. The students are numbered 1 to 17. The organization of my students include modification sheets, documentation, and IEP work. In reference to organization, I mean how I documented the students over time. To start off, the IEPs, if you find on my Product of Learning, you will find a specific section titled IEPs Written. This is where I've listed the 5 students that I worked with and specific students that the IEPs I had my hands on included Student 3, Student 7, Student 10, Student 12, and Student 17. They included 3 exits, 1 annual and reevaluation, and 1 annual. I also was involved in 4 additional meetings beyond the regular IEP meeting, which included parent conferences, student conferences, staff meetings in regards to a specific student, so on and so forth. The documentation to support the IEP decisions from the IEP team included content teacher support questionnaires, evidence proof, grades and schedules, and assessments. The documentation and assessment, example 1, was an exit. Okay, this student had ADHD. He was self-medicated. Due to my live binder and the way I organized everything, this student, if you look under the live binder portion of Student 7, you will find an overview, his modification sheet, his annual IEP from the previous one, his reeval, and then his eligibility, which we exited him on based on the team decision. The documentation you will find will support that the student is in honors classes, including biology, English, and math. He's functioning between a B to C range within these honors classes. Therefore, the team decided that the student no longer needed EC services. He was able to attain academic achievement on his own without the additional help of special education. However, the team determined that the student still needs modifications. Therefore, he was referred to the testing coordinator within Mount Pleasant High School, which she drew up a 504 plan. Continued documentation includes example number 2, annual and reeval. The student has a specific learning disability in reading. The student still qualifies for special education services, but testing was not needed for this reevaluation. This is due to the assessments throughout the beginning of the IEP process. If you look within Student 12's section of my live binder, under documentation, you will see the different testing mechanisms, which were vocabulary knowledge assessments, to prove that the student was not functioning at grade level. His reading comprehension was at level 5, which was at an 89% success rate, which is actually a grade 5. His vocabulary level for level 8, which is grade 8, was 50%, grade 7, 67%, and grade 6, 97%. He's functioning anywhere from 2 to 4 years below grade level. The IEP goals due to the testing, assessments, and data collection over time were based on vocabulary and reading comprehension. Example 3 was an annual. Student 17 has a specific learning disability in reading, math, and writing. The main reason why I'm focusing on student 17 is to show the transition that we implemented with this student. If you look under the documentation, we tested the student based on a work interest inventory. He tested the highest in service and physical work, which supports his desire to have a career in law enforcement. When he's asked what his career choice is, he automatically says law enforcement. However, he enjoys working with his hands and building. Therefore, he's okay with that being a fallback. The IEP team decided, based on his work interest, that we would pull from this interest inventory, to find specific areas that the student would possibly like to visit, possibly like to job shadow, and so on and so forth through the next 2 years before he graduates high school. Further on, we decided that the student would want to attend, based on his responses and based on his inquiry, that the student wants to attend a community college and will work part-time while attending school as well. Next, we will move on to the lesson planning. Each lesson plan of mine is modified due to the fact that I'm in an inclusion setting. This was pre-approved by Dr. Bowe and Professor Hurley Chamberlain. I'm first going to talk about lesson planning for my first block. This was a Math 1 inclusion setting where I have 5 EC students. The modified lesson plans includes my responsibilities, comments towards those responsibilities, modifications broken up for each student for easy access, as well as the IEP's goals listed, and then a section to reflect on the IEP goals. I also left a section through every lesson plan that I was able to reflect on additionally to the spots listed within the modified lesson plan. The way it would work is my responsibilities, I would circle yes if I did it or no if it was not completed throughout the class period. If something needed to be changed or modified, I would just write it into the additional comments. That way I had it for the next day, or if I learned from a specific homework check that wasn't the best way to do it, that maybe we should have pulled back on problems or assignments or something like that, I would add that to my additional comments for future reference. Lesson planning for Block 2 is very similar. I have the modifications listed where I have 6 students within this Math 2 inclusion setting. I had the section for the students, for me to reflect on the students' IEP goals, and then the IEP goals listed as well. Lesson planning for 4th block is my most elaborate, due to the fact that this is the room that I had the most responsibilities in. This was also an inclusion setting, but for English 1. I had 10 EC students in this classroom. It was my most diverse classroom within the 3 classes I had throughout the day. My modified lesson plan ranged for the accommodation sheets, the modification sheets, the interactive notebook introduction, the agenda, and the closure. I would do all the same day. I had additional space underneath my lesson plan that I would add in extra things throughout the day. For example, when we had a daybook check. When I was in charge of the daybook check, I would add in the additional information for that day. The modifications are listed as well, reflections for the IEP goals, and an additional area on the bottom of the lesson plan for me to reflect further if needed. Documentation. You have seen this sheet, the confidentiality IEP modification sheet, in previous slides. This sheet is specific for the teachers of the students. The modification sheet is given to a content teacher, the inclusion teachers, and the case managers. At the beginning of each semester, each teacher is given their first, second, third, and fourth block tabs within their binder, and each student that they have that qualifies for ECU services is within that specific tab. It lists their modifications, their classroom modifications, testing and classroom modifications, and then a comment, which would be a short paragraph, a snippet about the student, and then all their annual goals listed. It also references their case manager if they have a CA. CA is stands for Curriculum Assistance. It's the exact same thing as resource. The IP dates, areas of eligibility, student ID, grade, and then it lists first through fourth block of where the student is located at throughout the entire day. The pullout schedule works in a very specific way due to Mount Pleasant High School. We have what's called a power block system. Between third and fourth block, we have 2 35-minute periods. During the first 35-minute period, half of the student body goes to lunch. The other half goes to their assigned tutorial. Their assigned tutorial depends on the day of the week. Monday through Thursday, it ranges from first to fourth block. Friday is a freedom block, and then vice versa. So if you're on the upstairs, you go to lunch one period, and then tutorial the other, and then vice versa downstairs. This is a wonderful time for EC teachers to pull students. It keeps them from not being pulled from their actual classroom time. Tutorials are meant to give students extra additional support when needed, as well as extra teacher planning for when it's their planning block. I pulled up this individual calendar so you could see the way me and Ms. Newmeyer organized it. However, I did not attach our specific one to avoid confidentiality issues with the students' names listed. Here's an example that we gave one of the students. We gave each of our 17 caseload students a schedule based on their pullout requirements due to their IEP. For example, this student had one pullout a week. We would switch it up between blocks so that this student was not coming to us during every single one of their same classes. Therefore, here was a fourth block class, a first block, fourth block, second block, fourth block, so on and so forth. The next one I'm going to show you is a little bit different. We organized to where this student would come every single Tuesday due to his IEP requirement of meeting once a week, because during his second block he flexed, which means that that student did not have a second block. However, to avoid skipping classes, which is the same punishment if he skips a tutorial, we would require him to come to us for content support, IEP support, goal support, organization, so on and so forth, all during his Tuesday power block. Now to talk about my focus student. This was student 16, selective mutism. I focused on his IEP goal throughout the entire 2 months, ranging from February 13th to April 13th. His IEP goal reads as follows. When given the opportunity to respond to a teacher or staff member, the student will communicate his wants and needs, such as using the bathroom, by nodding or pointing with no more than 2 prompts, 7 out of 10 times. The intense documentation, as I just mentioned, ranged from February 13th to April 13th. The plan, we implemented a communication card, recorded the data over time, and made adjustments as needed. The communication card is presented on the right side of your screen. It's a simple yes/no question card. The sticky notes in the middle where it is an area for him to write on at any time needed. Copies were given to the student, content teacher, and case managers with extras in the office. There was significant growth over time. The data record forms were pretty different if you were the content teacher or the case manager. The content teacher, we made it pretty short, sweet, and simple to the point. 1 question, how many number of prompts without a response, 1, 2, and then a weekly total. Notes of observation in case they noted anything that they would like to share with us, as well as the annual goal written on the bottom. The reason why this one is a lot simpler than the case manager is due to the fact that the content teachers do not have as much time to focus on the student. The case manager, however, is within 2 inclusion classrooms with this student. Therefore, they're able to give additional support to the student, be more patient with him, give him extra time to respond, whereas the content teacher would not. The next data record sheet up on the screen that's on the right hand side is for the case manager. It was a lot more specific, where we had the date, number of prompts, and comments. Every single interaction with this student was expected to be recorded on this data sheet. Now, for the data. Prompts over time. These graphs represented does not include the amount of times a student did not respond. It just shows the percentages over time of the prompts given. 2 prompts, 1 prompt, 3 prompts, 4 prompts, and 5 prompts. As I just said, these do not represent whether the student responded or not. The content teacher supports were pretty straightforward. Due to the simplicity of the record sheets, we were able to determine that 29% of the time he responded, while 71% he did not to his art teacher. However, 57% of the time he responded to his science teacher, whereas 43% of the time he did not. Later in the study, he expressed to both me and his case manager that he enjoys his science class a lot more, and he likes his teacher a lot more. Therefore, he responded to him a lot more than he did his art teacher. The second graph is a lot more specific due to the recorded averages of prompts to answered questions. Okay, I hope that kind of made sense. I will describe it quickly. The daily average over time, so for example, February 14th, which is right here, he was given 1 prompt, 2 prompts, 5 prompts, and 3 prompts, 4 different questions. When averaged out, he responded at a 2.75 average rate, which would put us right there. The dotted red line shows the desired average. We want him in this area. We want him to respond in under 2 prompts. Therefore, anywhere underneath the red is not where we want the individual, okay? However, everybody has their bad day, all right? We got him pretty good on average up here. Like I said, everybody's got a bad day. It happens with the best of us. Therefore, we had 1 dip, but that's okay. It showed constant growth over time with the average being under 2, which is directly linked to his IEP goal. Lastly, the progress over time, September to April. As you can see, we first started recording data from the student in September due to him being a freshman. He started at 34%, 33%, 20%, jumped up to 31% when we implemented the communication device in February, 85% in March, and 90%. This progress over time represents the amount of the percentages of the student responding. He is currently responding at a 90% rate. Next, I'm going to talk about the technology portfolio. The setting was in my 4th block English 1 class with 9th graders. Every day I do the daily writing warm-up. However, today, on this day, I did my technology piece. I used everydaypolls.com. It's a free website that, if you go down to my reaction, I love this site. It is awesome. You're able to set up open-ended responses, polls, questionnaires, games, all kinds of stuff, all through this site online. Therefore, I used it for our daily writing warm-up. I put the prompt on the screen, and they responded with a couple words or sentences up to a paragraph, and it would randomly flash across the screen. They had a couple minutes to do so. After they were done, we dissected the responses together, discussed them, had people rebut them, and so on and so forth. The reason why we do the daily writing warm-up every day is not only for the students to practice their writing skills, but also to practice speaking in front of others and defending their opinions and sharing their opinions, as well as teaching them that their opinion matters. Over time, it was amazing to see the students grow from not being comfortable with their peers to fully wanting to share everything and show that their opinion means a lot to them and that everybody else's does too. What I learned from the specific technology piece is that it took more time than I initially thought due to the fact that we had to hand out laptops and have them set them up and all that kind of stuff, and to make sure that I needed backup devices. I had enough, but there was more students than what was originally accounted for ones that cell phones didn't work or their Wi-Fi wouldn't connect and so on and so forth. But the extra devices helped with making sure that every student was able to participate. As I said, I loved this site. It's awesome. I will definitely use it again. Lastly, I'm going to break down the standards, okay? These are the criteria standards directly referenced from the rubric of the POL portfolio. I'm doing this just to clarify on some things that have to do with my screencast and my portfolio and POL, due just to how modified and how different my product of learning had to be. To start off, the standards throughout my product of learning, I not only referenced the North Carolina standards, but I was very heavily reliant on the IEP goals. This is throughout the entire POL, ranging from the IEPs changing over time to my student focus to the lesson plans, so on and so forth. The criteria shows 100% of all the data collection, documentation, and everything gathered over the 2 weeks and beyond. The documentation ranged from January to April 13th, not just the 2 weeks of what a standard POL ranges between. Next would be the assessment alignment. The assessments were directly aligned with the IEP goals and the standards throughout the lesson planning. The IEP goals and monitoring of progress were directly referenced to the IEPs written, as well as the documentation for the students over time. Next would be the assessment strategies. The strategies used for assessments were modified throughout this criteria. I included assessment pieces within the IEPs, which included formative, summative, and diagnostic testing. The formative assessment ranged from observation notes to documentation of whole class participation to pullouts to IEP goal testing over time, so on and so forth. Summative assessments were majority within the IEPs and my focus student throughout the focus student documentation. The progress goal testing for the IEPs were able to support whether the student needed to move on with that IEP to their next goal, or if they needed to have it altered, or if they needed to continue with it, so on and so forth. The summative testing was a lot about proof and support of the students, not just in the classroom, but mainly with their EC services. Next would be the data implementation. The assessment data implementation was changed over time with the focus student, with lesson planning. It was on the fly within the classroom setting. However, it's mainly focused within the IEP modifications and my focus student. When lessons were altered, they were, like I said, usually on the fly, and they were referenced directly within the reference pieces of the lesson plans. Next would be the 21st century skills. This is major for students within EC services. This does not only include my technology portfolio, which is a major 21st century skill, but it also has to do with the communication goal with student 16, the transitional goals with the students who are all within high school, and the 17 caseload students I work with, all of which directly link to the fact that we want our students to be the most productive members of society that they can be. Those 21st century skills go beyond the classroom. Next would be the summative assessment, or the summative achievement, excuse me. As mentioned in section 3, this part is majorly through the IEPs, as mentioned within the assessment alignment, assessment strategies, and assessment data implementation is what I was referencing to. There were several used through documentation with the scanned tests that are on LiveBinder, as well as mentioned throughout the individual's IEP goals or their specific IEPs. This is also noticed within the lesson plans of the separate rooms that were unit testing, quiz testing, daybook checks, so on and so forth. Next would be the outcomes. The IEP show the most support of this standard over the course of the standards breakdown or the POL or my screencast, all of which are linked through the assessments and learning over time that are directly referenced to their IEP goals or the state standards. I've provided previous IEPs for each of the students that I worked with, the 5 students that I worked with on their IEPs, to show growth from the last IEP to the current IEP. I also included documentation, teacher data, excuse me, and content class support data. Next to last would be the collaboration and monitoring. This section I could go on forever and ever about. This was key to my student teaching this semester. Not only was I co-teaching with the EC teacher, but I was in an inclusion setting for every classroom. Therefore, there was 3 of us collaborating at all times together. This is supported within the IEP goals, the pull-out, the lesson planning, the inclusion setting, all of the above. For this, it was one of the strongest points of mine, just due to the setting that I was in and just due to the people that I was working with during these last couple months. And lastly, before the noteworthy pieces, the impact on learning is directly referenced within the IEP goals over time. If you look at the impact just on student 16, which was my focus student of my Greg Scholar research and my honors program, his impact over learning and his impact over time directly referenced to his IEP goal and to growth as an individual, his communication skills, his being comfortable with his case manager and his classroom teachers. I mean, he grew from a 31% to a 90% success rate over just a 2-month time span with just a communication implementation device. Beyond that, the impact of learning can be seen throughout my lesson plans and support directly referenced to the lessons. Lastly, I'm going to mention my noteworthy pieces, my focus students, which I've referenced several times throughout this entire piece, and the IEPs written, both of which were additional pieces that I feel that I've put forth throughout my product of learning and throughout my time at Mount Pleasant High School. And I feel that all of which, all the standards, all of the requirements, all fully shine through my POL, not only within a 2-week time span, but within a 2-month time span. I understand that my screencast is a little bit longer than the average or than the requirement, but for me to cover all the bases and give a full synopsis of what my POL has and the meat and the potatoes and all the above of what my POL entails, I feel that I had to further explain myself in detail. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to defend my POL to you in the best and most respectful way, and that I'm able to represent myself in a way that shows all of the work and all of the growth that I have achieved over the last 2 months. Thank you very much.